We have strict rules about that sort of thing. The actors are not supposed to step out of character. It's kind of weird when you think about it. You know, here we all are, but I pretend you're not there, and you pretend that I'm a character in some play and not me. So here's the thing. In this play, I am a household servant to Admiral Priestman. My name is Tom. I suppose I have a last name, but the writer didn't tell me what it is, so I'm just Tom, an household servant. And as a servant, I'm really not supposed to be seen or heard. That's another reason I shouldn't be talking to you. Now, there's all that rot on Downton Abbey about lords and ladies running downstairs to apologise to some servant that they've offended. I don't think that ever happened. It certainly wouldn't happen with Admiral Priestman. He's a good enough sort, but he believes that everyone has their proper station in life.
I say, Tom.
Oh, here he comes now, back to work. Good morning, my lord.
Now, Father, for my morning dispatches.
I've left them on your desk, sir.
And a copy of my gentleman's magazine.
Right beside your chair, sir.
Oh, yes, of course. Now, Tom, last night, there was a frightful ruckus down here last night, and I won't have it. Lady Priestman was at her wit's end. We must have order in this house, and I expect you to keep it. Do I make myself clear?
Begging your pardon, my lord. We had a mouse in the pantry, and when the houseboy tried to swat at it, darned if it didn't slide across the floor and straight up Miss Flinder's dress. Well, with her screaming and shaking and rolling about, the rest of us couldn't help but laugh.
Tom, you mistake me. I did not ask you to give me the reason for the boo-haw. I asked you to make sure that there's no repeat of it. Do I make myself clear?
Of course, sir. Won't happen again, sir. You can depend on it.
That'll be all. Oh, Tom. Mr. Howell, the man I told you about, has promised to come this morning. Show him in when he arrives.
Of course, my lord. So here's the great thing about being a servant. You really are invisible. You and I can have this little conversation, and the Admiral will no more take note of me than a bird outside the window. It's something like being a ghost. You prowl around the house all day long, hearing other people's conversations, observing their petty quarrels, laughing at their nonsense, and none's the wiser. I like being invisible. The other great thing about being a servant is that you never have to think for yourself. We all just do what we are told to do. Now, I know you think that liberty and equality are your natural-born rights, but I don't believe in all that claptrap about the rights of man. Freedom is a burden, if you ask me. Look at what's going on in France. They want to get rid of their king and install a people's republic, but my guess is they'll just exchange one pack of tyrants for the other. Why, the first thing the rabble did was tear down the Bastille and let all the rogues back on the streets. And there's no more bread in the bakeries now than there was before the start of the revolution. Yeah, they're getting their freedom in Paris. Freedom to starve and be murdered in the streets. Let me be a servant in a good house, with a warm bed, and 3 square meals a day. Suits me just fine. I believe our guest has arrived. Let me take your hat and coat, sir. Right this way. The Admiral is expecting you. Mr. John Howard, sir.
Come in, Mr. Howard, and warm yourself by the fire. Why any good Englishman would leave the comforts of home to come to Russia at this time of the year is more than I can fathom.
And yet here you are, Admiral, a fellow Englishman in this frozen land.
Well, right you are, but a soldier goes where he is called. The Russians have asked me to end this perpetual war against the Turk.
And your advice seems to have been well heeded. From what I hear, the Turk is on the run on both land and sea. I want to thank you for your kind invitation to your home. It's been a long time since I had companionship with a fellow countryman.
Pish posh. We're glad to have you. I hope you found your lodging satisfactory.
Oh, I have no complaints. After my days on the road, a warm fire and a comfortable bed is like heaven itself.
You must note that all of us here at Kirchen have been looking forward to meeting the great John Howard. Your reputation as a humanitarian precedes you.
Oh, the great John Howard. You know, Admiral, that I spent my youth carting vegetables through Smithfield Market.
I had no idea.
Yes, I don't think anyone thought that I was on the path to greatness then, least of all myself. My father had made his fortune in trade, but he wanted his son educated as a gentleman. But I proved to be such a sorry student that he soon apprenticed me out to a greengrocer. Father, don't leave me.
Now, John, this is all for your own good.
But I want to be with you, Father.
Nonsense. It's time you grew up.
But I'm afraid.
Afraid? No son of mine is afraid. Now dry those tears and act like a man.
Seems like your father was a hard man, Howard.
He did not spare the rod, I can assure you of that. But my father was right. It was time I grew up. But I was such a restless boy. I'd rather be rolling my little cart through the market than sitting in the classroom anyway. But my apprenticeship did not last long. My father died soon thereafter, and his fortune was settled on my sister and myself. I used my inheritance to buy out the rest of my apprenticeship and set myself up as a gentleman.
Well, you beat the old man in the end.
Oh, no, in the end, he had his way.
How do you mean?
Well, I tried to live a life of leisure. Bought myself some fine clothes. Made the grand tour of the continent. Saw everything from Paris down to Rome. But I don't write, and I don't paint anything either, so in the end it was all a bit of a disappointment. No, I'm afraid my father's plan for me worked only too well. To this day, I'd rather be talking with the gardener than the lord of the manor.
Well, I hope you don't mind having a conversation with me. So, you'd rather be visiting prisons than palaces?
Well, I never thought of it that way, but yes, I do feel more useful inspecting the conditions of our prisons than gazing at plaster angels.
Well, if it's misery you're looking for, you've come to the right place. We dish it out in spades here.
So I've seen. I spent the last several weeks inspecting the Russian hospitals from St. Petersburg to Moscow to Kremenchuk. The condition of the men is among the worst I have ever seen, and I am no stranger to human suffering. The men are all laid out in the wards. That there's hardly any medicine for them or nurses to tend their wounds. The wards are filthy, crowded, and filled with the stench of rotting flesh. Surely you've seen it, Admiral, and how can you tolerate it?
Yes, it's a filthy mess. But that's war, isn't it?
But surely you would agree, Admiral, that we need to provide decent medical care for our wounded, if for no other reason than to fill our ranks for the next battle.
Well, of course I want our men to receive proper care. But I leave the running of the hospitals to the surgeons. I know quarterdecks and cannons, not festering wounds and bed sores.
I understand, Admiral, but I'm not asking you to tend their wounds. I just think a word from you might help to get the attention of the Russians. I'm sorry to be so direct, but I simply cannot stand silent when there is so much suffering.
Well, you've certainly caught the attention of the Empress. She has ordered Potemkin to follow all your instructions with regard to the hospitals here at Kirchen.
The Empress does seem to be very interested in my work. I believe that she wants to lead Russia toward a more enlightened view of things.
Oh, God, Howard. No one enlightens Russia. The Russian foot soldier is just one step removed from the beast of the field, and the officers are not much better.
But they are still all God's creatures, Admiral. I believe that the Empress truly wants to improve the lives of the Russian peasants. She once told me that Russia could never truly be great unless all her people were free from misery and hunger.
Stuff and nonsense, Howard. It's all very well to talk about the rights of man when you're sitting down for a meal in that fine palace. But it's ordinary men that build the walls of those palaces. And it's ordinary men that serve those fancy meals in that palace. And it's ordinary men that slug through those muddy fields and live on water and turnips and end their life in that miserable field hospital that you saw. And if those men ever decide to point their bayonets elsewhere towards their own officers, and they decide that they want to sleep in that palace, then you'll see what the Empress truly thinks about the rights of people.
Oh, anyway, ranting against the rights of man again. He's quite convinced that any act of mercy might undo the social order. Now, might we call a ceasefire long enough for you to introduce me to your guest?
This is Mr. John Howard, of whom you've heard so much. This Mr. Howard is my dear wife, Maria.
Oh.
You'll find she is quite your admirer.
It's such a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Howard. My husband is quite right in that I have the profoundest admiration for all your humanitarian labors. Please, sit. Tom, the tea. I intend to interrogate Mr. Howard thoroughly. The least we can do is fortify him for the experience.
I've heard of this Mr. Howard. The prisoner's friend, some call him. Me father spent a bit of time in jail, could have used such a friend, no doubt. He went to debtor's prison for £2, 3 and 6. I've seen my lord spend as much in an evening on brandy and cigars, but £2, 3 and 6 is not easy to come by in a working man's house. A brewer's dray ran over me father's foot, put him out of work. He was off the docks for 6 months. It took me mum a year to pay that £2, 3 and 6. What with washing the neighbor's clothes, the little odd jobs we lads could pick up. I went into service at 8 years old myself, and I was glad to get it. Without this job, I might have wound up in the King's Army, and like as not been rotting away in one of those field hospitals.
Now, you must tell me all about your work. What made you take such an interest in prisons?
Well, I was telling your husband earlier that my father left me with a comfortable fortune, but I wanted a vocation. Oh, I'm afraid my first attempt at humanitarian efforts ended somewhat disastrously. You've heard of the great earthquake of Lisbon.
Oh, well, indeed I have. The descriptions in the press were horrifying.
Well, I was young and unencumbered and thought I might do something to help relieve the suffering of the survivors of the earthquake. So I gathered together some supplies and some medicines and booked passage for Lisbon.
And were you able to be of assistance to the survivors?
Not in the least, I'm afraid. Our ship was seized by a French privateer, and we were all crammed into this disgusting dungeon in Brest. 80 of us in a space that was originally designed for no more than 4 and 20, and we nearly died for want of food and water. But the French commander, seeing from my clothes that I was a man of some means, thought he smelled profit in me. Who would have thought that a well-tailored coat could be the salvation of us all? But he told me that he would release me on my promise as a gentleman that I would send him my ransom when I reached England. And so I did, but I could not rest until I had secured the release of all the crew and the passengers. So, although I may have been of no help to the Portuguese, at least I might have provided some small service to my fellow countrymen who otherwise might have died in a French dungeon.
Well, I never knew you had been a prisoner yourself. So it was your sympathy for the prisoners that was stirred by your time as prisoner of war.
Well, no, at least not immediately. After that ordeal, I wanted nothing more than to return to the simple life of country living. Our estate is in Covington, near Bedford. I took an interest in the management of our estate, and then I took a wife. Henrietta Leeds. She was the cousin of my good friend, Samuel Whitbread of the Whitbread Breweries. Oh, Henrietta was the sweetest creature. But our time together was all too short. I think about her every day.
It's no good, is it, John? A man without a wife is like a stove without a fire. I don't know where I'd be without my dear Maria.
It was a very hard time for me. But I just felt that God must have some purpose in all of this. I just kept doing things. I looked after our estate and our fields, and then I made some improvements in our tenants' cottages. I could always hear Henrietta's voice. It's no use our praying for people in faraway countries when we can't even take care of our own neighbors. But I just felt that there was something more that I should be doing.
Oh, I should have liked to have met your Henrietta, Mr. Howard. I'm sure she would have been very proud for all that you have done. You have no children?
Oh, yes, one, a boy.
Oh.
Henrietta died shortly after he was born.
And the boy?
Jack.
So Jack stayed with you?
Yes, until it was time for him to go off to school.
Don't leave me here, Father. I hate this place.
Nonsense, you're not a child anymore.
Couldn't I just live at home?
I have to leave tomorrow to inspect the prisons in Ireland.
Couldn't I go with you?
Prisons are no place for a child. Besides, Thomason will be taking care of you. Now run along and learn your lessons like a good boy.
I'll stay, Father, but I'll be cursed if I'll be a good boy.
And how is your son now?
Very ill, I hear.
Well, you must be anxious to return to him.
I don't think he's very anxious to see me. We are not on the best of terms.
Well, the Admiral and I have two sons. Harold is a lieutenant aboard the HMS Reliance. He's a very tall young man with piercing blue eyes. Quite a favorite with the ladies.
He's a first-rate sailor. I no doubt he'll wear the Admiral's hat someday.
But our Percy is a different story.
The most willful child that ever walked the earth.
Percy is a troubled soul. God knows we've done the best for him, but he's never found his place. I wanted you to know, Mr. Howard, that we know what it is like to live with a wayward child.
It's very kind of you to confide in me. We bear too much in silence.
Heave me, boys, oh heave away, way, way, roll and go, with the anchors aboard and the cables all stored, singing rollicking randy-dandy-o.
What are you staring at? You're drunk. So what if I am?
Oh, you listen to me. I am your father.
Thanks for reminding me. I'd almost forgotten.
Oh, don't you dare turn your back on me.
Oh, but dear Father, isn't that exactly what you did to me?
And where is your Percy now, Lady Priestman?
I honestly don't know. We haven't seen him in over a year.
He is not welcome in this house, I can tell you that, Howard. The things that he said the last time he was here, they were intolerable! I won't have him here until he mends his ways. He's better off dead as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, you don't mean it, my dear.
But I do! I wanted to cut the tongue out of his mouth for the things he said to you last time we saw him. We'll talk no more of it.
Ah! The tea has arrived. Milk and sugar, Mr. Howard.
Neither for me, thank you.
Well, the Admiral will have your share and his as well.
Indeed I will. They are on short supply at sea, and I'll take a double portion on that.
So, Mr. Howard, how did you find what you wanted to do with your life?
My brothers say that it found me. A group of men from Bedfordshire approached me about standing for the office of High Sheriff. I told them that I was honored, but that it was out of the question.
You're too modest for your own good,
It
Howard.
had nothing to do with modesty. You see, the Test Act was still on the books at the time, and I told them that I would not forswear my religion for the sake of office.
How was it managed then?
Oh, it was by my good friend, Samuel Whitbread. He assured me that attitudes had changed within the Church of England and that there would be no investigation into my religion. So, I took the oath and was sworn in before the magistrates. Now, one of the responsibilities of a sheriff is the maintenance of the county jail. In truth, I don't think any high sheriff had been to the Bedford jail in recent memory.
I'm not surprised at that. I can think of no one who would willingly go into a jail.
But I felt oddly compelled to do so. I kept hearing the words in Matthew, "I was in prison and ye came to me."
And how were you received?
By the prisoners with gratitude and thanks. I think my mere presence in that place of desolation seemed to lift their hearts. But I don't think the jailer was as glad to see me. I imagine he thought he was about to be sacked.
Well, if you'd sent him packing, it'd be no more than he deserved. Most of those turnkeys are worse than the inmates.
What did you see in that Bedford jail that so affected you?
Oh, prison was a foul, fetid, noisome place. A place where hope goes to die. But what disturbed me the most were the innocent men who were kept there in jail because they couldn't pay their jail fees.
Oh, you mean the fines levied against them?
Oh no, this has nothing to do with any kind of judgment made against them by the court. In our jails, a man must pay a fee to the jailer before he can be released. A man can be found innocent of any crime whatsoever and still be detained if he hasn't the wherewithal to pay the fee.
Well, that is just outrageous.
I'm afraid being poor is always the biggest offense in England. Listen, Howard. I no doubt that our prisons are hard places, but I cannot think that murderers and thieves should sleep on silver sheets.
True enough, Admiral. But to deprive them of their liberties, to separate them from their families, to make them the scorn of all men, is this not punishment enough? Must we also subject them to diseases and make women the prey of the depravities of fellow prisoners? Surely this is enough punishment for them as it is. Surely you would have not just do God's will in heaven and on earth, but in our prisons as well.
Prisons are not instruments of reform, Howard. They are places of punishment. An eagle is born to soar over the mountains, and a rat is born to wallow in the gutter. Do what you will, Howard, but the evil men of this world are bound for destruction.
I cannot believe that, Admiral. I believe that not just these men, but all men are born with corrupted hearts. But we are all the objects of God's mercy. We are not reformed by our own striving, but by the grace of God. Take that away, and my home is in the gutter as well.
Surely we all stand in need of God's grace. Mr. Howard, just tell us, what brings you here? We're a long way from English prisons.
Well, as I was finishing my survey of the English prisons, I became interested in another sort of confinement, one equally degrading and far more deadly. You're aware that travelers returning from foreign lands are often quarantined in lazarettos until they can get a clean bill of health.
Plague houses. I know them well. A man may be healthy when he arrives at one, but dead within a fortnight.
I once had myself confined in a lazaretto in Venice for 6 weeks.
What were you hoping to accomplish?
Well, I was hoping that I could find a better way to stop the spread of the plague.
You intentionally had yourself confined to a lazaretto?
You're a madman.
Oh, for a saint!
Oh, I assure you I am neither. I simply
But
felt...
why did you take such a risk then?
Well, I simply felt that I could not make adequate recommendations about the improvement of the lazarettos until I had actually experienced a stay in one. I did fall ill there and thought that I would almost die, but God's hand of protection was upon me.
Well, you seem to put God's grace quite to the test, Howard.
That may be true. But in any case, having taken an interest in one form of hospital, it was only natural that I take an interest in the military hospitals. Oh, they are the sources of so much human suffering. Do you realize that in Russia alone, 70,000 men died in military hospitals last year? Many of them dying of the pestilence before they ever even took the field. Oh, surely men who serve their country with valor deserve better than that.
Yes. Howard was enlisting me to his campaign before you joined us here. He is most persuasive.
I'm sure we will do all within our power to assist you in your work here, Mr. Howard.
Well, two of you aligned against me. I have no hope of escape. Now, let's say, however much we may differ on the fate of the common prisoner, I will see to it that our soldiers get better care.
Tom, you may clear now.
It's a right good question whether Mr. Howard is a saint or a madman. I've seen pictures of the saints. Teared apart by lions, shot full of arrows, crucified upside down. I'm told it's supposed to be inspiring. I could never make out the point of dying for a cause. Better to live and fight another day, I'd say. As for madmen, well, results are about the same. Most of them wind up dead. Only difference is, one dies for God, the other thinks he is God. Well, Mr. Howard does want to do good, but he shouldn't give much thought to his own life. I'd say he's a bit of a saint and a madman.
Mr. Howard, I have a favor to ask of you. Now, I know you're here visiting the military prisons, but I wonder if you might be able to help me in an errand of mercy.
Well, certainly, if it's within my power.
Count Comastadius is a neighbor of ours and one who has befriended us. There is a young lady who is a guest in his home. She has taken ill with a wretched fever. The Count, having heard of your knowledge of various maladies, has asked if you might look in on the young lady and just offer your advice.
Well, I am no physician, madam. Surely there are others who could do the job much better than I.
I understand your reluctance, Mr. Howard, but the physicians attending her, I must give her little help of recovery. Anything you might do for her, just your presence there would be a great comfort to our friends.
Well, I can hardly refuse someone who has shown me so much kindness.
Howard, the Comastadius' house is a long journey from here. No telling what the weather will be like tomorrow.
Admiral, I expect that the weather tomorrow will be very much like the weather the day after tomorrow and the day after that. If I wait for good weather in the middle of a Russian winter, I shall never see the young lady.
I'm sure they would be forever grateful for your kindness to them.
What is the young lady's name?
Katerina. She is a house guest with the Comastadius family. Her parents had to leave the country on business before their daughter took ill. I can't imagine what would be more important than their own daughter.
Well, I'm sure that whatever called them away was of a very serious nature. And one cannot always help one's own children. In my own experience, parents are often those who can least help their own children because their feelings are impediments to proper action.
Duty must make most men seem unnatural, Howard. Maria gave birth to our 3 children while I was at sea.
You may have done me as good a service by being away from home as pacing up and down the hall.
Oh, say nothing about the fine art of pacing. I consider one of my greatest virtues.
Oh, now I really must be going.
Oh, must you go so soon, Mr. Howard?
Oh, I'm afraid I must. I want to thank you for your very kind hospitality, but I really must get back and make some order out of all the notes that I've made of the hospitals while I've been here.
Of course. We'll send a carriage around tomorrow morning when you go to see Katerina.
Oh, nonsense. With the recent rains, the roads are almost impassable for a horse, much less a carriage. No, I'll go out on my own.
Well, Howard, you are right. The roads are more like muddy rivers. I'll send my man along with you. He knows the way, and he'll make sure that you get there safely. Tom! Tom! I want you to escort Mr. Howard to the home of Count Comstadius tomorrow. You may take the bay mare.
I would appreciate any help that you can be, Tom. Let's leave at first light. The days are short, and I want to return by dusk.
I'll be ready at break of day, sir.
It's been a delight to speak with you, and I'm so appreciative of your willingness to see Katerina. She's such a dear girl. Please do what you can for her.
Of course.
And come see us again soon.
It'll be my pleasure.
Well, ain't I the lucky one? A ride in the freezing rain with Mr. Howard to start me day. At least I'm young. I wonder if the old man's up to it. He's at least 70 if he's a day. Lord, spare me the company of saints. Them that adores 'em most likely never seen one for real. It don't take tuppence to light a candle for one. But you must rise early and face a bit of wind to ride at one side.